Hey guys, it's Annette here again. I'm the traveling mom boss. You guys, I love to travel on a budget. My channel is all about my vlogging throughout Europe with my kids on a budget, as well as tips and tricks on how to travel with your kids on a budget. Today's video is all about, is Paris overrated? Or should you just travel to another country throughout Europe? Before I get into that, guys, I do want to let you guys know that I just created an amazing course all about how to travel on a budget with your kids. So everything I've learned throughout the past 2 years, traveling with my kids, road tripping throughout the United States and traveling throughout Europe for the past 3 months is in my course. So it's everything I've learned, all my tricks. So you guys make sure you get that course. It will be released on October 1st. So if you're watching this after October 1st, it is available in the description. If you're watching anytime before that, just make sure you come back to this video. So guys, as I was saying, I wanted to let you guys know, is Paris overrated? So me and my family actually stayed in Paris for 4 weeks. We actually stayed in Saint Ouen. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, which is just outside of Paris, is right on the borderline. So it's practically almost in the city center. So this is actually my 3rd trip to Paris. So that's why I can let you guys know what my opinion is after being there 3 times. So the first thing I want to let you guys know before you go to Paris is it is expensive. So as a budget traveler, this is something that I had to deal with. I knew what I was getting into, but I wanted to give my kids the experience of being in Paris, because prior to that, the 2 times that I visited, I went with my sister as an annual birthday trip. So it was my kids' turn to be there, but I knew that I had to be on a tight budget because everything was really expensive. So we were somewhat limited in what we were able to do. We did do a lot of free activities because of the fact that things are really expensive. Food is expensive, etc. Okay, so keep that in mind when you decide whether or not you want to go to Paris, because it is expensive. I do want to say that's one of the most expensive cities to visit in Europe. And it's also popular, of course. So due to the fact that it is expensive, I recommend to visit Paris for about 3 days. If you want to stay longer, I wouldn't recommend staying longer than 7 days. I did it for a month, and this is coming from someone who stayed there for an entire month. The other times that I went to Paris was with my sister, and we stayed a maximum of 10 days. So I recommend, after doing 10 days and after doing 30, I recommend between 3 to 7 days, because if you're a budget traveler, I wouldn't recommend staying there for longer than 7 days. As I mentioned before, we did stay right outside of the city center, and my opinion is it didn't really matter. It's just as expensive. So it doesn't really matter where you stay in Paris. I've stayed in Montmartre. I stayed in Mellemont, I think the area is called, and I can say it's just as expensive. And my opinion of staying outside of the city center is it's not really worth it, because a lot of tourists are not really going to visit the areas outside of the city center. So a lot of the restaurants were closed because of, the fact that we're still in a pandemic. So a lot of the restaurants were still closed. There's not that many things to do outside of the city center. Most of the touristy places to visit is in the city center. So you would have to travel to wherever you want to visit from wherever your location is outside of the city center. So if you're willing to travel about 20 to 30 minutes on a train or bus, then you're free to do it. I don't really recommend driving because it is really busy. There's lots of people around. So you do have to consider how long it's going to take you to get from where you are outside of the city center to get in the city center. If you're in the city center, then you can easily get from point A to B by walking or taking a train, and a train probably won't take more than 10 minutes. So staying outside of the city center was just as expensive to eat when we did go to a restaurant. So I didn't really feel like I got a deal by being outside of the city center. The restaurants that were open did provide great food, but it wasn't any cheaper than the restaurants within the city center. I recommend that if you're going to go visit Paris, that you go off season, because you might get a better deal. When I visited with my sister, we went off season. We went like around late September. So that's not a time of the year when many people visit. People usually visit in the summertime between like June to August, or like early September. And that's also when a lot of the people that live in Paris go on vacation. So it's a busy time of the year for people who live there and for people who are visiting Paris. So I recommend visiting before June or after September, because you'll be able to get a better deal, because the prices are inflated because there's more tourists who are willing to spend as much money as the restaurants or whatever you're planning on doing is willing to charge you. The only plus about visiting during the peak season, which is what we did when I traveled there with my kids, is that we were able to rent an Airbnb from someone who owned the home. So it was actually cheaper than an actual Airbnb where it's just ran by a management. So I recommend, if you're gonna visit for a long time or even for a few days, to try to get an Airbnb that's through someone who owns the rental or lives there, because it's gonna be a little bit cheaper than renting through someone Airbnb that is ran by a management company. Another thing I learned about traveling with my kids is that it's much more expensive when you're traveling with kids. So I recommend, if you're gonna go to Paris, you either go solo or with one other person, because it's really expensive when you're paying for things times 3, because I have 2 kids. So Paris is not really the place that you want to visit if you're a single parent or if you're a budget traveler with kids. I would recommend going somewhere else because it's very expensive when you're traveling with kids, and if you're going to stay in Paris as long as I did with my kids. My last thing I want to let you guys know about traveling to Paris with kids is that many of the restaurants requires that you are vaccinated in order to sit there and eat. So if your kids are not vaccinated, they may not be able to eat depending on what their age is. I have a 13-year-old who does fall into the category of being vaccinated. When we left to go travel, at that time, kids weren't eligible to get vaccinated. So I could not go to a lot of the restaurants with her because she wasn't vaccinated. And if you do want to eat there, you do have to provide proof of a negative COVID a COVID test. So I couldn't really go and get her tested every time we were gonna go out to eat. My little one, she didn't really fall in that category, so it was easy to just go out with her, but I didn't want to take one and not the other. So that's something you have to consider. They're very strict when it comes to entering a restaurant and not being vaccinated. They actually check your COVID vaccine, the physical paper if you have one, because in the United States, that's what we have, or the digital one that the Europeans use. So that's another thing you want to consider when you're going to travel to Paris or any other European country. You do need to have that digital certificate, or you need to provide a proof of a negative COVID test, which can take a lot of time. And it is about our safety, but you do have to consider that when you're traveling to Paris or when you're traveling with your kids to Paris. Long story short, after going to Paris 3 times, I can kind of say the 3rd time around, it is overrated. So we'll definitely be going to a different part of France when we visit again. I do love Paris very much so, but when I visit again, I will be doing solo travel or just do it as an annual thing with my sister. It's way too much money with kids, and I won't be staying a month next time I go, but I'll definitely visit again. It just won't be anytime soon. So you guys, thank you so much for watching this video. Please make sure you check out my course in the description. Please make sure you like, subscribe, and share, and I'll see you on my next video.